You're late.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
It's wonderful to see you, Gandalf.
C'est calme, monsieur, Uncle Bilbo's best.
So it begins.
That was Alive and Awake from a Christian heavy metal band called Mortal that I got into back in 1993. And it's kind of music that my buddy Perry Burnett, Dr. Perry Burnett, might be getting into these days, as he finds that kind of worship very impactful to participate with. I'm checking in today actually on Good Friday, a couple weeks later than I actually recorded this conversation, and it felt like the exact right time to share it actually. This one doesn't have as many edits and cuts and sort of projections into the type of content of the conversation that Perry and I get into, and the reason for that is it's taking a lot of time, and I've had a lot of great meaningful engagements with people that are in the can, if you will, and I want them to see the light of day before they become less relevant, because things have been changing in my life that don't reflect the output of the videos. And I also just want you to get to know Perry, and this feels like a little bit of an introduction of sorts, as he's somebody that I've gotten to know very well over the years in real life. He's brilliant, as you're about to see, and he's real. He's really real. He actually asked if we could do this conversation naked, so that the intimacy of a podcast could actually be felt. When I told him that we'd actually be doing a video podcast, he realized that maybe that wasn't going to be the most appropriate thing. But we do get into really real topics very quickly, and there is discussion of suicide within the first couple minutes, so be warned on that. Hope you really enjoyed this conversation with my friend, Dr. Perry Burnett. Oh, and one other thing real quick. I'm actually coming to you from Arizona. Went to the Arizona Diamondbacks opening day, where they set a record for the most hits and the most runs in any team's opening day game in one inning. So coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona on a very good Friday, I give you Dr. Perry Burnett. All right. So I'm here in the flesh, in our meat suits, with a good friend, Dr. Perry Burnett. You liked when I called you doctor?
Yeah, it's the first time, I think.
That's the first time I've ever
I don't know.
recognized your academic prowess.
Yeah.
So it's Sunday, and we are not at a church, but the previous Sunday you were at a church, and then 2 Sundays ago we were both at that church. And the way that this church functions is that they intentionally have a rhythm of rest, and every first Sunday of the month they sort of take it off. And we find ourselves on one of those Sundays, and we felt the call to sort of have it together. So I think we've had so many, conversations and embodied experiences together that it could go in a lot of different directions. And since what we hope to experience in church is like a presence, a participation in something that is true and beautiful and good, I feel like we have enough background with each other that we can just sort of trust that wherever we go, that we're going to get there, or that we will go there by the light of the Spirit. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah. So I say the word church. I know that a lot of things pop into your mind of sort of what church has been for you. Like if I were to ask you sort of your earliest or most impactful memories of church, where does your mind go?
So I'll give you a little bit of background on my side. Is I grew up in and out of church, kind of maybe like the Easter, Christmas type people. And it wasn't until I got to college that I kind of had a crisis. I was very suicidal in college. And my mom at that point, maybe a year or two before that, had become kind of re-energized with religion. And she kept sending me Bibles and Bibles and Bibles. So I had a stack of Bibles.
Different
20, 30
like different kinds
versions,
of Bibles? Okay,
yeah,
okay.
20, 30 different versions. Try this version,
Like
try that
he obviously
version,
didn't like that one, so let's
try this
okay,
version.
okay.
And so I would stay awake all night crying and then sleep all day. So to the point where I was very contemplating taking my life. And so one night there was a Bible on the stack, and she told me to start with the New Testament. And so I just picked it up and started reading instead. So it was, Matthew and then Mark, and my joke is Luke, and it's all the same thing over and over and over again. I said, is there anything in this besides the same story over
Variations
and over again?
on a theme.
Same thing. So eventually I just started reading the Bible and devouring the Bible.
This is while you're in college, like presumably while you're studying.
This is why
and
I was.
You
yes,
have reading assigned to you as homework, like.
Yes, I was failing all of my classes,
Okay.
and this was down in Texas.
Okay.
Failing all of my classes, didn't go to any of my classes, and I would just read the Bible all the time, and I didn't know what I was reading. I didn't. It wasn't a mental exercise. It was a spiritual exercise. I wasn't really processing it cognitively. It was something that was feeding me life in a way that bypassed my cognition.
Do you remember specific stories or passages or
No.
moments from? Okay, so it's you
Not
have
the first time. Not when the first time reading through the New Testament.
And
Reading it, and it was keeping me alive.
And at this point, was any of your other education Christian or biblically based? Like what sort of classes were you taking at this point?
Botany.
Which
So I was learning I was supposed to. I don't know any of this. I was supposed to learn 20 scientific names of plants a week, and memorize that for my college classes.
And this was associated with a career path, or this was just a
I was
course
undecided. What do you do after high school? I don't know. Go to college.
Got it.
And so I was in college, didn't have a career path at all, and
baseball was still in the picture at this point.
no, I'm 5'8", left-handed,
But you're left-handed.
so I still have a chance. Though they got rid of the pitcher rule, where you can only come in for one batter. You've got to face at least 3 batters, which that ended it for me.
Interesting. Okay.
So I had finished baseball. I was just going to college.
You hadn't found your thing yet.
I hadn't found my thing. I was drifting, taking classes because that's what I was supposed to do, and so that's and part of it. And then I found some other activities to do that may not be legal. And so those compounded my depression at that point in time. So a lot of alcohol and drugs. And that kind of compounded my depression at that period of time. And so I was at the verge of committing suicide, and this saved my life. Honestly, I would not be here unless I had found religion at that time. So I was extremely excited about religion after that time. Still didn't know what I wanted to do. And so my mom's like, why don't you go to Bible school? And so I said, okay, great, I'll go to Bible school. I'll become a pastor, and I will, do this for my life, for a living.
So at that point, as you applied the passion towards these new classes, like did that result in like a new type of like academic rigor and like you were
no, so I dropped out of that
for
university.
the Bible classes did you take those on with
Yes.
like a new sort of like
Yes,
because I know that like parts of the end of the story is you're a full-time professor right now who's beloved by your students for how much you inspire them to get into and devour, their classes.
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
The irony around you being a bad student, I'm sure maybe it's a more common tale than I would suspect.
Well, so I when I went to Bible college, I devoured it all. I mean, that's what my homework was, to read the Bible. I mean, it was fantastic. And then, what happens is, over a period of time, you start dealing with other aspects of religion that philosophers and theologians have struggled with for thousands of years. The problem of evil, all these kinds of issues. And they struggle with those because there's not a good answer for those situations. And so what ended up happening is that religion saved my life, and then slowly religion began to kill me. It began to destroy my life. So
Can I ask one other question? Because it's interesting because you're using the word religion a lot, and a lot of folks in the last decade or two, the fastest growing religion is kind of a none of the above, or sometimes called spiritual but not religious. But I haven't heard you use that word yet.
Yeah. So I also teach a class up at USI called Power, Evil, and Religion. And so my definition of religion is basically, it's a very shorthand definition of religion. It is the answer to two questions, which is what happens when you die? And there's really only three answers you can give. Nothing happens, something happens, or I don't know what happens. That's great. And then there is the second one, is how do you live in light of your first answer? And I don't have time to get into it today here, but
I'm sure you've got lectures online.
There are lectures that we can go over and talk about, because it tries to solve a very specific dilemma, a prisoner's dilemma game, which is the second question.
Sure. So that's why
there's only about 3 or 4 answers to that.
Okay.
So there's really only a few religions, but everybody has one. So atheistic humanism is a religion. Agnostic Buddhism is a religion. So everyone has a religion because everyone has to answer those questions.
One other quick double click on this part of your story right now is prayer. I would guess that your mother was praying for you at this time as well. Would she tell you as much?
Yes.
Okay. And so was there a point where that began to be a practice for you as well?
I've always struggled with prayer. Because I am first trying to solve these problems philosophically or academically, some of these issues of a sovereign God. You have a I call it impossible triangle of God's foreknowledge, God's sovereignty, and man's free will, and that's the impossible triangle, to have all 3 of those operate. You've got a lot of theologians trying to solve that, and you end up with Arminianism, Calvinism, all these different ways to solve the problem. So I've always struggled with prayer as praying to a positive, transcendent entity that is supposed to listen to my prayers and then answer my prayers.
All right, so prayer for you then wasn't coming natural. Any other elaborations on the prayer part? I don't know why this is coming up for me of wanting to know.
Prayer has always been an issue, but worship has always been easy for me.
Okay.
So worship has always been easy.
Do you have a definition for worship as well?
It's changed over the years. But to worship is for me to behold a transcendent, to use that term very loosely, value, to behold a transcendent value, and to esteem it and to meditate on a transcendent value.
Did all of that happen before you started reading the Bible, or was this sort of
So this goes back to maybe my first experience in church. So my mom took me back when I finally said, this is want to be a Christian. My mom took me to a local church, and it was a common church that exists today. You had the pastor going up there and giving a sermon. It was a Southern Baptist church, and so you sang a couple hymns. You had the pastor give a sermon, and there was a call at the end. And I went up there one time. I said, I want Jesus in my heart, and we went through the baptism piece and everything.
When did you feel the call? When he made the call, or earlier in the service?
It took a number of times to visit.
So you knew that
But
the
they were
call
always
was a
making
part
the
of it,
call.
and that if you ever felt that inclination, that there was a response. There was a time to respond.
Southern Baptist, they do it every
Sure.
time.
Sure.
So, but yet after that, I wasn't really growing. And so my mom said, hey, there's another church across town who has had an experience, and they have fundamentally transformed the way that they do services. So we went across town, and it was more of a charismatic church. So here was a church that people were falling down, being slain in the spirit. And, I walk in and immediately think cult.
People speaking in tongues.
Yes. And so, but I was open, and was laser focused on just looking at the words of the worship, and the words seemed legit. And so I left, and I said, and my mom's like, do you want to go back? I said, yes, I want more of that. I don't know what that is, but that's what is attracting me. So I have language now to describe that, which is I had an experience of awe. So there was an experience where I walked in and I was in awe. There was something there that I believed in but didn't yet believe in, if that makes sense.
It's part of that transcendence.
It was a belief before belief. And because that's what awe is. So awe is a belief before belief. And
that's awesome.
And,
forgive me.
So then what? So I have. Let's take a step back and maybe talk about a little bit about those awe experiences.
Yeah.
So now right, there's a psychologist, I think it's Dasher Keltner. I'm probably butchering that. Anyway, he has an awe. He studied awe for a long period of time.
Okay.
So he's got
the science of awe.
The science of awe. So he's got the 8 wonders of awe. And these awe experiences are basically, right, this experience you have in which you are encountering an order or a pattern that is outside of yourself, that is larger than yourself. And you can have these maybe, like, for example, I had them reading the Bible. Those were epiphanies. This is something, wow, right? This is something I say, oh my God, right? You have it in nature all the time, right? You have it in church with what we call collective effervescence. It's like, wow, oh my
Durkheim.
God, right? Yeah. So there's these 8 different ways in which we basically say, oh my God, right? And so these are these experiences of awe, which you have what we may call a transcendent experience. You have it, oh my God, this is awesome. There is something here that is bigger than myself that I am attracted to and desire, but I don't know what it is. And so this awe experience is designed, right, to lead you to experience wonder, which is the reflection on that experience, to lead to curiosity, which is to lead to hope, which then I know you know a lot of, which is to lead to flow. So the flow experience is, I remember reading Mahai Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow.
Well done.
And I remember reading it and was like, this is great. I love this, right? Who ever, he says, right, has learned to discipline the human body like a ballerina, right? Or to know these things in these ways, which you can really master the body, the mind. And so I loved it when I read it, but I didn't know how to ever do it. I never knew, okay, do I just pick something and just, and start flowing with it? And what I learned recently was it's the awe experience that is the light that is supposed to lead me to open up myself in terms of curiosity, that then is lead me to enter into flow to find out what that awe experience is. And so when you have that awe experience, you go, oh my God, this is amazing. And you change, you open, you have curiosity, you have hope, and then now you learn to flow in that awe experience. And this is really incorporating that awe experience into yourself. So I knew but now I have that language, which going back to my first time at that church was, this is something I need.
And did it lead into a flow?
Yeah. So then you led into, I want to go back. I want to be open. I'm curious. What is this? Why are people raising their hands? Why are people falling on the floor? What is going on here? And so I had gone back and was, there was a freedom in worship that I couldn't have myself. And I had gotten to the point where I really wanted to lift my hands. So one of the hindrances of flow, as you'll know, is self-consciousness.
Sure.
And so I was very self-conscious of raising my hands. I couldn't raise my hands during worship. I was afraid of what everybody else would
even while
think
watching
about
others.
me. Everybody else was doing it.
They're not even looking at you, but yeah, you got a spotlight
I couldn't do
effect.
it under the symbolic order. And so there was a time where there was a prayer, and I said, I'm gonna raise my hands. I'm gonna go up there. I'm gonna ask for prayer, and when this person touches me, I'm gonna raise my hands. And so I went up there, and I don't even know what he said, but he started praying over me. My hands just shot up.
Wow.
And from that moment on, I was able to freely worship from that moment on because I would experience deliverance in that moment. And so I needed, the church to free me to experience a greater level of being, right? So this body, the church body, is this incredible community, right, that is designed to lead people to greater and greater levels of complexity, greater and greater levels of awe, greater and greater levels of being that only can happen within that community of believers. However,
there's a but coming.
That's the design of the church. The way that we currently run church, under my personal experience, hasn't been designed that way.
I'm so curious as to what happened in the preceding or the next years of that experience of deliverance. Like, I'm into the story. Like, when does it start to break down?
So it starts to break down is, I still want to be a pastor because this is what I'm supposed to do. And I'll skip. Maybe I'll come back to the prophecy later on. So
it was spoken like a great prophet. nice little tease there.
So anyway, I get a position where there was, this is a large church, like a 3,000 member church, and there was an opening for the college, an interim college pastor.
Cool.
Basically under the leadership of somebody else.
Okay.
And I kind of put the fleece out there and said, God, if you want me to have this, let no one else apply. And this was a very coveted position. And I talked to many people. I was going to apply to that, but I didn't do it. So I was the only one. And so I said, This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And whenever that happens, you're in for a very difficult time. And whenever you have confirmation like that. It was the second worst year of my life. So the first
Another
year,
good tease.
of course, was there. So here I was trying to hear and do what I felt like I was supposed to be doing as this leader of these college.
And this is when you say do what you're supposed to be doing, this is under the direction of someone in authority above you, or more of a spiritual direction.
Spiritual direction.
Okay, from a trend from God, or
yes.
from gotcha.
And so there was a conflict between the person who was over me and what I felt like I was supposed to be doing from God. And there was the business side of church that came. It was about numbers, right? It was about growing the ministry. Sure. It was about an agenda that ambition, let's say, right?
Okay.
So ambition came in from the person above me. They wanted to move up into higher levels of church leadership. They needed some results to show higher levels of church leadership, and that really disillusioned me from the idea of church. And so I really was very distasteful and said, this is not what I want to do. If this is what church is, and this is not what I want to do. And, I understand that now because, again, the way that the church model functions is what I call the bullseye model. So there is a bullseye, and the way a typical church functions is that the middle of that bullseye is the lead pastor. And so the lead pastor usually preaches, 50-80% of the time. And what is attempted to do in the bullseye model is, if we hear what the lead pastor is doing and saying, this lead pastor is telling us who God is, right? But it's really their interpretation of who God is. But the goal of the church is to conform to that image of the lead pastor. And once we have that, we have unity in the church, and the church then is able to accomplish its goals, which is unity and doing and being the God that the lead pastor has preached and is preaching. And so you have people following, these lead pastors, especially when you get to mega churches. You have these phenomenally gifted speakers, phenomenally incredibly articulate individuals. And we follow these people around and want to believe in their God. But really it's their interpretation of God. And so that's typically how a church works. When I go to a church, I have to conform myself to the image of the God of the lead pastor. And I have a really hard time with that because I will go to a church, and since I think about this all the time, so I would say I'm, as you are, deeply religious because I think about death a lot. I think about meaning and purpose a lot. So those are deeply religious questions. And so I think about these all the time. And so when I hear, this, again, usually rich white male, tell me who they think God is, and I hear a God that I don't believe in. So I'm like, I don't believe God is like that. It's hard for me to then find a home when my goal in that church is to conform to that image of God that I don't believe in.
So you're experiencing a articulation of something that you recognize as not God, and are surrounded by others who might disagree with you, or is there ever going to be someone who's not you that can articulate God in a way that, let's say me, I tell you, God, is a mustachioed, 6 foot, person, like, however I want to describe God. Like, can you ever imagine sort of aligning with a third party depiction of God? And if not, is that just like a fatal flaw in all churches?
So, no, I don't think there is a singular image of God that can be articulated as absolute truth that is able to be known by one human that I would then follow to conform myself to that image of God. So I believe that there is a new church model, we'll get into this, that is needed for the next Reformation. And my belief is that there is a lot of stuff going on in theology, a lot of stuff going on in philosophy that is incredibly exciting, and that we are on the verge of a new Reformation that will lead to a revolution and a revival of religion across all the world.
That's a lot of REs. Are you tempted to bring Zizek into the picture yet, or should we save that for our second conversation?
Save that for way later until I learn a whole lot more.
Yeah.
About Zizek.
So I do know you as one of the biggest Zizek, kind of fans. I think I even referred to you as a Zizek disciple.
Yes.
And always fascinates me, and that just the insights that you can glean from him. They're not as accessible to me and to a broader sort of audience, and so I think
because my lack of articulation.
No. I don't.
It is. I'm still trying to learn and trying to articulate.
I mean it more as like a compliment to like the depths, the absolute depths and sincerity with which you wrestle with this. To where if his philosophies do click for you on some levels, then I have, I guess, an awe experience of where I believe that because I believe that you have wrestled with it appropriately. Right. And so I'm excited to walk with you, be on the way with you as that continues to become clear. And if it's a matter of articulation on your side, totally fine and excited about that. But if you say there's a there, I believe it because I believe in the struggle that you took to find it.
So, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go back to maybe you had an awe experience, maybe seeing one of the awe experiences is our primary awe experience is through other humans. When we see moral excellence or we see courage. We see honesty, we see integrity, and it blows us away. We see another human do something that, we say, "Oh my God, they sacrificed themselves. Oh my God, this is an incredible experience that I'm having. That this other human is capable of doing this." And so that's an awe experience that can be had. And so, yes, for me, it's Zizek, but I think a lot of times my biggest awe experience, right, is through my children, right, and through being able to see my 4-year-old laugh is one of the greatest awe experiences. And there is a purity there, right? There is a wholeness, a wholesomeness
yep,
there that, man, I want to capture that. To be able to laugh like that, to be able to carefree abandon myself to laughter, to looking at the world and looking at others, in a way that is full of beauty and full of wonder. And so there's these experiences, right, that we can have. And I think the being talk about I'll butcher the word, so it's fidelity,
okay,
right? So it's the adjectival verb of that, or the word of that,
okay,
fidelitasness to those awe experiences. So when you have an awe experience, right,
gotcha.
this is something that you're supposed to then hold on to. Don't let it go, and hold on to that until you flow into that experience. And so, as you know, that happens a lot in music. For me, and for you. So, music has an awe experience where you go, "Oh my God, this is the greatest song I've ever heard. This is mind blowing." And when you have an "oh my God" experience, there's God, right? In other words, I think we need, we're going to need a different view of God than a positive transcendent entity that exists, right? That's I don't think personally that's a biblical view of God. There's a great verse that Paul says, "In him we live and move and have our being." That doesn't sound like a transcendent positive entity that's outside of reality. Yep. That's an immanence.
Yep.
That is something that is nearer to us than ourselves, yet also not a part of us. We're in it, but not of it. Right? That's the kingdom of God.
Emmanuel.
Yes, and so we're going to need a different view of God instead of a positive transcendent entity, and that I think is a great way to maybe think about God is when I have an "oh my God" experience, is to go, what is this? What is God here? What is my, oh my God? What value am I beholding that is outraged, capturing my every attention? The child's laughter. What is in that child's laughter that is capturing my every move and makes me want to flow and integrate that laughter into my life, right? That song that I hear. What is it about that awe experience that I want to integrate into my life through those flow experiences?
You know what I feel from this, and knowing your 4-year-old is, and actually even knowing you in sort of like a completely uproarious, like falling on the floor laughter, right? Like I haven't seen your son in one of those, but I've seen you in those. And I've got to think that your mom experienced that same thing with you when you were 4, and had that same moment of awe of like, my little Pear Bear, like just that was a godly experience for her. And then to see and to feel your despair, when you were 20, 19.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I'm going to send him a Bible. I'm going to send him another Bible. I'm going to send another Bible. And even as like, I want to say that's like clumsy. And I don't mean it in a like it's that's the best that she could do, but it was so pure.
Absolutely.
That if I know that I love him, how can I return him to that state of joy that I know is in there because I've seen it and experienced it? And of course, then you've now created 5 amazing children who are doing that again.
Yeah, without force, right? Without coercion, without punishment. In other words, she was able to return me or give me access to that, right? I still had to choose it myself. So I had to make the choice, but having availability of those resources at my hands, right? In other words, they were all around me. Made it a whole lot easier without having to use coercion, without having to use force, without having to use threats, without having to use those terms that we may associate negatively with religion.
Yeah, and with church, and what you experienced, when you were sort of in a staff vocational kind of position. So take me to the next step to where your relationship with church, was not dependent on your paycheck. Where your ability to take it or leave it became a little freer because you found, employment outside of it. Or if we need to go somewhere else before that,
So I left church and I needed a paycheck. And so I didn't complete my college degree in Texas. So I said, I'm going to go back to college and just major in business because I need a job. And that seems to be a pretty general major that I can get a job with. To take business classes, I had to take a prereq in economics. So I had an awe experience.
In economics. Which I believe you.
It is. So it was this is what, maybe I call it the secular gospel. This economics allowed me to understand why the world was the way that it was. It allowed me to look around the world and understand it, just like religion did, right? Religion gives you a way to understand behavior, understand the world in a way. And so then this economics said, here, this is human behavior. This is a way to understand the world around you.
It's a map that corresponded with the territory and lived experience that you had.
Yes.
And saw among others.
And I know you had for psychology, right?
Yes.
So it was this is a way that I can understand the world.
Yes.
And for me, it was just economics, which is a social science, just like psychology. And so I kept on taking classes, and they finally told me that there were no more classes to take.
You have exhausted. You
have
come
to
the
go
end of the
do
book.
something. You've got to go do something.
Yeah.
And so I asked my advisor, and he said, you should be a professor because then you can go and learn economics the rest of your life. And you can spend all of your life learning and coming up with new research for people to know and to do and to push the discipline forward so people can continue to have that experience.
It's kind of beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, really, the fact that he or she saw that in you and affirmed it had to have been very encouraging.
Absolutely. And so then that's how I ended up becoming a professor.
So you have a better map now, a map that corresponds with how the world works, better than church? Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that...
yeah, better than church. I had left church.
Okay.
Church wasn't anywhere near my thought process for 10 years.
Yeah.
While I was looking into, and I found economics, and economics was telling me and giving me a way to view the world, and I was making a living off of it, and I was a preacher in economics, and it was my religion.
Yeah.
And so after a certain period of time, some of these more existential questions would always be there. So it was always, death never left me. I never stopped thinking about death.
Yeah. Economics did not address death in a meaningful way.
Which is why, to me, economics isn't... I say it's a religion, it functions as a religion, but it doesn't deal with death, so it's not a formal religion, because it doesn't answer the question, what happens when you die?
Gotcha.
There's not a formal answer to that question. So those other questions begin to kind of percolate. They were always there, but I had settled down. I had gotten married. I had a child and 2 children, or maybe one more on the way. And so those questions, we had settled down here in Evansville. It had been, a certain period of time, maybe 5 years of being a professor. No, it's after this because I got tenure, and then you start settling down after that. So maybe 7-8 years I'd been here, and so those questions began to percolate back up. And what I was able to do with my economic knowledge, I was able to go back and answer those religious questions using economic theory. So they gave me the tools I was able to then combine. Usually what happens is, especially maybe in academia, is you have to kind of compartmentalize yourself. You've got your academics over here, maybe you have your spirituality over here. You have, this thing which is considered irrational, right? Religion being this irrational belief in supernatural, what have you. So this isn't something academia could really ever deal with because it was irrational. So academia never studied religion, but economics had begun to change their perspective on what we mean by rationality, and had begun to study religion. And we had this whole growing thing of the economics of religion because we changed our definition of what we mean by rational. And so we humans now, right, are what current economics would call self-delusion cultivators. So we cultivate delusions for ourselves. And this is actually optimal experience. This is actually, to live an optimal life, you need a delusion for yourself. And by delusion, I mean non-factual. I don't mean false. But the idea here is this. We think we're better looking than we actually are.
Sure.
Right? We think we're more competent than we actually are.
More intelligent.
Yeah, more intelligent than we actually are. So those are cultivated delusions that actually make us better humans because we've cultivated a delusion. Now, it's not an extreme delusion.
Sure.
Right? So I do this in my class. I have them rate themselves in terms of their physical appearance. We look around the class, and the average in the class should be 5. The average in the class is always 7. And about 90% of students always rate themselves as 7s out of 10. Because why? There's
slightly above average.
Slightly above average. You don't want to say you're a 10.
Right.
Because that's not an optimal delusion. And so, so there's this view of humanity in which the optimal human, to live an optimal human existence, is to cultivate a delusion. And so this allows us to now study religion, not as false or not as fact, right? But as a cultivated delusional system of information that allows us to then function as optimal humans. So we need religion to function as optimal humans.
And this is the religion we're talking about that answers that question of
What happens when
death.
you die? Yes, and then how do you? It's technically, yeah. So how do you live? But there's a technical piece to that.
So this is all happening in your field while you're studying it. This whole thing that you had sort of committed the rest of your life to, you were called into this by your advisor in college. Now you're experiencing it. Your worlds are colliding again. I'm gonna ask two questions. When did church get back into the picture, and when did you meet Austin? And if they're the same, if the answers are related, pick whichever order you want.
Let's see. So, I don't know. Church, it has always it's a difficult one.
Yeah. Well, and maybe
let's see. Church never really got back into the picture necessarily. In other words, I never found a church home, and so we had some friends who were going to around here, a church around here. Who cares?
Yeah, we can leave the name out
anyway,
of it. Yeah.
And so there was a group of people, and so I would attend. And
is this with kids or before kids?
With kids. So yeah, we had kids.
So a lot of people, they go back to church, like the having of the kids is the impetus for them to return.
Which is why we went to church. I'd bring them there on Sunday, and they would go off to children's church because we families knew each other and they had kids, and so they all went to the same church. So we would go to the same church, and they would go play. And typically what I would do is I would try to listen to the sermon. I said, this is not a God I believe in. And so I would take my youngest one, and we would go out and play in the playground. And we would come back in, and then, I enjoyed singing. I love singing. I'd stay for the worship, for the music, for the worship. And then I would leave for the sermon. And so that's kind of how church operated for me when I got back into it. We then tried, there was some individuals within that little group. We had about 4 families there, and they wanted to do kind of a home church. So we did a home church. And we had heard of this guru, Austin Maxheimer, who was a home church guru, and we invited him over. And to talk about home church. And it was great because his first comment was, "Can I join you?"
He was looking for a home church as well?
Yeah, it was just, this is a great experience, wow. This is what I want as well, kind of thing. And I think we all have a longing for, again, that group of people who can tell us who we are, and reinforce that every time we see them, right? And so that is what a community is. So a community is, again, so our identity, we think, may be internal. And we may think we have an essence. Let's go back to postmodernism. There is no essence in us. But we feel like we have an essence. We feel like we have an identity. But that identity is really found primarily through our social surroundings. When I see you, I see my name back at me. I know myself through your eyes. And we have had some experiences in the past that have allowed me to transform the image of myself, because you've seen me do things. You've seen me be courageous.
Yeah.
You've seen me be brave. And because you've seen me act in that way, when I see you, I see Perry as brave, Perry as courageous, or more specifically, Perry as unashamed, as not ashamed of who I am. And so that community is what church is, right? It's a community of people who will tell you, this is who you are. This is who you are. And it's supposed to, this is why we get to a new version of church. I don't get that when I sit in a pew and listen to somebody else tell me who they think God is. It doesn't happen. So, yet it happens when we experience something together as a community. And then you watch me become vulnerable, and you watch me do something that I'm scared to do, that I'm afraid to do, that I want to do more than anything I've ever wanted to do, but I can't. And the only reason I can't is because you put your hands on me, right? And you deliver me. You deliver me from that old image of myself, just like that person did, right, to deliver me. Just like my advisor did, is to put their hand on you, and they see you and they call you something different, right? But also, after you experience something, after you do something, I know you as somebody new, and you can't run back and hide to your old self.
Not if you were truly vulnerable.
You can't. You can't go back and hide to being a shameful person. I can't go back.
It's funny that you hit the tree. Like we just added this tree, and I'm thinking of like Adam and Eve, and you know how they both used the tree to like experience more knowledge of good and evil, and then also to hide their shame.
Exactly.
And that we joked about this before we started recording, because you had thought that this was going to be like an audio-based podcast at first, and you're like, you know what, we might as well just do it naked because nobody's going to see us, and then we can truly be vulnerable.
Be vulnerable.
And we've been a part of some rituals together. Like we've figured out that going through these rituals and finding the ability to trust that what is going to be reflected back to us is not only worthy of being received, but like necessary for life and truth. And you even created a ritual just for me. A lot of our rituals are these sort of group rituals, not all of them, and we can share more of them. But I remember the ritual that you created for me. I was about to describe it, but I'm actually feeling a sort of like fidelity to the experience that I don't need to describe it. Like we shared it, right. It was real, and it was.
And okay, so here's the thing as well. So what's happening here, right, is that there's two kinds of knowledge. Okay, there's explicit knowledge and there's tacit knowledge, right? So when we're able to communicate philosophy or education, right, or economics, that's all explicit knowledge. And explicit knowledge can be stored, right? It can be put in a book. But tacit knowledge is typically, they look at it as an iceberg. It's the mass that is underwater, and it's personal. It's experiential. It's very difficult to communicate.
It wouldn't.
And so if you were to share that experience, it won't resonate necessarily, because
people see it as the iceberg. They'll see the part above the surface. They'll see the
explicit knowledge.
It won't do any. Yeah.
And you can't communicate the tacit piece very well, and so it will be broken. It will be difficult to describe. You'll search for words, and you won't be able to really express what you want to express because it's personal. It's wisdom is what it is, right? And wisdom is not something that can be passed on. Wisdom is something that has to be experienced to be able to be understood.
What was powerful, and I do feel is appropriate to share about that experience for me, is that as we discussed, church over many, many conversations, we realized that the thing that was alive for you in church and dead was the opposite for me. So the music would sometimes catch me, especially when I was younger. It caught me a little bit more, but over the years, it was like, let's just skip this music part and get to the good stuff. Let's get to the sermon, right? I want the sermon, not necessarily because I wanted to take in wholesale what was being said to me, but it just, I love words. It just would spark things. It would spark images, and like
the epiphanies.
That's
you were certain you wanted
I'm having all
the
this
epiphanies, the awe experiences of that's a new way of thinking. That's new. That's different. That's awe, right?
And in some ways, the way that I'm understanding even more through this conversation is that what was alive for me was receiving something. And when you would worship, you were almost giving something. Like that you had your hands up, whether it was a surrender, whether it was a praise, like the music for you is like it's this, you're giving your voice, you're singing, you're letting go of your self-consciousness to sort of dance, move, whatever is sort of happening. You're giving all that up. And the part for me was the receiving. and the way that you sort of structured this, I think, was your very thoughtful way of bridging what you knew that I needed, that involved music and that involved receiving and having to give something up and having to trust in something, and like sort of in that order, to where it was like, okay, you're going to get a bunch of things at the beginning here, and then you're going to have to give something up. And it just, I want someone to tell me that was not church. You know,
Yeah.
How is that not church?
Right, and that is, and I think that's the model of the church that is coming.
This is the
This is the church
Reformation that
coming.
you speak of.
It is the.
Is this the prophecy that you teased?
Oh
earlier?
no! So the prophecy was that what it was going to be. I was going to be the standard bearer for the next generation, and I interpreted that as preacher, right? In other words, I was going to be the standard bearer for the next generation. I'm now an economics professor, so I am a standard bearer for the next generation, just not in any way that I had thought. And
I know you don't like to toot your own horn, but like it's well known in our community and at your university that you carry that calling with so much sincerity and truthfulness that people will rate it as either you are their favorite professor that they've had, or a couple of your classes are the best classes that they've ever taken.
it's a love-hate relationship.
Where's the hate part?
I get both.
You do get hate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, but yeah.
But is it because
love it
there's
or I
an
hate it.
intensity of the experience that
Maybe
you have to have a response?
I say that I'm in the job of blowing people's minds, in which I didn't,
Maybe some people didn't sign up for that.
yeah, exactly. So that's, yes, I want a piece of paper. I want to pass this class. I want the easiest path to pass the class. I don't want to.
Sure, my goal
I don't
is
want
way
my
down the line
mind
over
to
here,
be
yeah.
blown. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to jump through hoops. I don't want to.
I got a plan.
Think about things in ways that I haven't thought about things before. I want to get through as quick and fast as I can. I don't want my mind blown. I don't want to think differently. So, but go back to the church experience. I always use the phrase participatory transcendence. So the church that is coming, the new model of church, will be ritual-based model of church. But it is a way in which we all participate in the transcendence. So we won't have an audience anymore. There won't be. I remember sitting at a church in a pew, and I'm like, this next generation is not going to sit in a pew. We don't do pews anymore. We don't do audience. I don't want to sit in an audience. Nobody wants to sit in an audience, and I want to participate. And I want to participate in the transcendence. And so here's the idea. One more thing is with that is in the Bible, we are called to be witnesses, not like audience, right? And we are a witnessing community, right? We are to witness each other's actions. We are to witness when you are doing something brave in the midst of a vulnerable experience. And I witness that, you change. We know how personal transformation happens. We know scientifically how personal transformation happens. We know how this occurs. It just doesn't happen at church because the model that we're using doesn't allow for personal transformation at church. Now, it can still happen. I'm not saying that churches don't experience personal transformation, but it doesn't happen on Sunday morning. I can have an epiphany on Sunday morning when the pastor's saying something, but I go home and I have a flow experience with that, but I still need somebody there to see me. It doesn't work if I'm alone. After I have an epiphany, I go home, I search the scriptures, I know them, but the scriptures, right, are there to point to Christ, right? They're there to get me out of myself, right? They're there to bring me back to somebody seeing me in a different way.
Ooh, okay. I was gonna clarify something, but you just woke up something else. The seeing. So I want to go to our men's retreats. We read a book together and created and participated together in a retreat just for men around the 4 male archetypes. And so it's king, warrior, magician, lover. And that role of the king to see, his subjects.
To set things right in the kingdom. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
order. So
but
order,
it's
right?
the witnessing too.
Yes.
The ordering and the naming, the calling,
Yes.
the seeing,
Yes.
the witnessing. That part is really alive for me right now too.
So the way humans function, again, we could talk to maybe, I don't know how much you want to bring that podcast in, but we talk about, I use different terminology. So there's objective truth, subjective truth, and then there's human truth, which is experiential truth. And so experiential truth is known metaphorically. So we know the world through metaphors. There's a great book, Metaphors We Live By. But that the way that I understand the world is through the use of metaphors. Naming is a metaphorical way of understanding something, right? So I can name you positive things. I could also name you negative things. And when I name you negative things, there's new ways that I can interact with you. Okay, so for example, let's go back to genocide. So genocide, right, the only way that those genocides in terms of the Jews, the Tutsis, were possible were through metaphorical naming, were through naming the Jews as rats, naming the Tutsis as cockroaches in Rwanda. So because I've named you a rat or I've named you a cockroach, this allows a new way to relate to you, which is to exterminate you. And not only is it a new way to relate to you, it's the right thing to do. So I'm doing what is right because to exterminate a cockroach is the right thing to do. So that's why the naming in the community of people who name you is so important, because it allows me to relate to you in a new way when I have a new name for you. But it can't be just a nickname that I come up with. It's got to be something that I see in you that I call you or that I've known you as. And when I know you that, I can relate to you in a new way, right? So we have a whole new relationship because of these different names that we call ourselves or that we call other people. And it's all known metaphorically. And so that's what, when we're engaged in a ritual, right, there is something that happens in which I lose a piece of myself because it's broken open. There's a disruption that happens in my old identity. I do something, I say something in that ritual, and then you witness that. And what you're witnessing is my new name, calling me by a new name. And so you're giving me a new identity, and you're calling me that new name, whether it's verbally or not.
Interesting.
Is I see you and I know that. I know that new name. So that's the way that we know how transformation happens. We know how personal transformation happens. We are just at the point of being able to redesign the church model that focuses on personal transformation, that focuses on a community of people who engage in ritualistic activities of a naming of other participants within that community.
Whew. Okay. We brought Austin into it. Do you remember how Austin introduced us actually?
At USI?
Yeah. Over coffee, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah. He seemed to see something in both of us that was church adjacent or church like. I don't even know if he really had to frame the conversation very much. He just knew that we were sort of pointed in similar directions, and it would make sense for us to intersect sooner rather than later. And he is, since, this is probably 6-7 years ago. I don't know. It's been a while, And now he called us into this new local church here, recently. And we both responded in the affirmative. And I know we had actually looked at, so the backstory behind this building that we're in is that you and Austin actually had looked at it as a potential. Do you want to? How would you describe what you were wanting?
Religious community. I mean.
Building your own church, is that going too far?
Probably.
Okay.
But
building something like a church because you had mostly lost faith in discovering.
Because I need it. Yeah, so I need to find that. I need to find that thing.
And so now we've been called into this new church, which has this name of Open Table. And the limited experiences I've had with it so far, it is mostly participatory, or at least there's an openness for more of that to come. Are you hopeful, or how do you feel about the prospects of something that we've been called into being able to be a part of this reformation that you can kind of see on the horizon?
I am extremely hopeful that something will happen. I'm not sure if it's necessarily where it's going to happen, but I know and I believe firmly in my lifetime that there will be at least the beginning of a spiritual reformation and revival. I think that we are on the cusp of this immense beauty that will reawaken reawaken the religious community. And it may be by crisis, right? I mean, crisis is one of the ways to disrupt. A crisis, like the root word of crisis, or the etymology of it, it's a health related word. Like when someone's body, they're at a crisis moment, and it's like you're at the very sort of bottom of the script. It's like, do we let this illness, this whatever, finish its course and kill the patient, or do we make a move, make a turn, and return them back to life, have them go from asleep to awake? And so I think it necessarily will be crisis that births this new life. Going back to rituals are a designed and contained crisis. So it is a contained crisis with ritual elders so that it doesn't become an uncontained crisis, which can be damaging. It can be deadly when you have an uncontained crisis. So it is a contained crisis that is designed, right, for personal transformation. So transformation has to have crisis. And yeah, I am extremely hopeful, and I am extremely confident that something amazing will be happening in the religious communities. Wow. As we kind of move into, right, a new phase of religious development.
Well, I am happy and humbled and excited that we are in the same place and that we get to do this together, and extremely grateful that you felt like the call to be, intimate and vulnerable here and record it for folks to share, and hopefully more will be able to be learned from this as we move forward.
Well, thank you for having me, Zach.
Thanks, brother. Right. I love you.
I love you too.
Perfect.